Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where executive coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Hi there, senior executive leaders. Welcome to episode number 74. I'm Alicia Cowan, your host, and today around the Cowan House, we are falling into fall. It is definitely a different energy as we head into like mid-September as I'm recording this. Everything is just feeling more fall sports. We have football going on. Our sophomore in high school is a cheerleader, so we've been attending like the fall football games. We also are season ticket holders of the Tampa Bay Bucks, and so we've got a game coming up, and we will, after we record this, we will have gone and seen them play the Jets at home. So we'll know how that turned out by the time this goes live. I also bought tickets to my alma mater, Florida State, and we'll head up there this season. Haven't been there in years, so it's going to be really fun to go to a Florida State game and see them play at home. And my son has a ton of swim meets going on, so we have one coming up soon as well. And so it's just all the fall things that really have kicked off, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. My daughter actually came over yesterday, and she made us homemade fall treats. She made this like pumpkin cold brew coffee and these delicious like pumpkin cinnamon rolls that were like amazing. They were so good. She's actually moving to California on Tuesday, and we're really sad about it. We're gonna miss her a lot. And it's wild to have these adult children that are moving on with their lives and doing different fun things. And so excited, but also bittersweet, kind of sad. But yeah, so that's what's going on here around the Cowan House. I love to fill you in about what's happening and talk to you about where my head's at, because these podcasts really are inspired by definitely life and my clients and what's going on for them. And so this week will be no different. We are going to talk today about a book that I've been reading. It's called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. It is a really good book and was recommended to me actually several times by a lot of different people, but have had it on my mind because we're going to talk about some of the themes of this book and how it ties into some of the themes that I see with you all, executives, and what you hit in terms of your capacity. And so in this book, it talks a lot about the upper limit problem. And I'm going to just put this in my own terms. It's like when you go through life and you're successful, but you get to a certain point where you may have been succeeding, but maybe at times you just hit this point where it feels really like almost too good to be true. You feel too happy and almost too powerful in your life, and you're feeling like really like a lot of momentum, but that starts to freak you out. And so you subconsciously might self-sabotage yourself to bring yourself back down because of fear that overcomes you. And so there is a lot of parallels that I see with this to executive presence and imposter syndrome. So we're going to kind of tie these all together. And again, so inspired by this book, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but I'm going to make some parallels that are my own to imposter syndrome and executive presence. And what imposter syndrome says to us, as I've talked about on this podcast, is basically you don't deserve to be here, right? Or you don't think you're good enough to be in this role. And sometimes it's that confidence that you hit, the confidence wall. And the upper limit problem says something very similar. It's like essentially like don't get too big for your britches, is the saying goes. And both end up keeping you small as a leader. They'll bring you down. And how this shows up for executives is things like being worried, over preparing, maybe downplaying yourself and your wins, deflecting, perhaps over micromanaging and needing control, being really critical of others and their work, putting blame on others, maybe squabbling. And I use the word squabbling very specifically because it's like fighting over something that is like unnecessary. Maybe hiding your feelings about something or not really speaking significant truths to the relevant people. I see that a lot. I always call we talk about like in difficult conversations, it always comes up. Or a big one is just hesitating to take really bold risks and make big decisions. And so I'll talk through some of those examples as we get through it. But it definitely essentially just holds you back from being the leader that you want to be. So let's talk about how this shows up and why this is so important. So, how the upper limit problem might show up for executives. So, some examples of what I was talking about before is again, the hiding from significant feelings could sound like this. It could sound like turning down significant opportunities. So, the scenario of it, I've had this happen. An executive that gets invited to have a conversation or a speaking engagement, like at a major industry event. But what she'll do is instead of taking it on, she's convinced herself that she is too busy or she is not ready yet. And this upper limit behavior essentially self-sabotages by shrinking away from that visibility because the opportunity feels too big. Another example would be worry. So I gave me the example of like over preparing or over explaining. So here's a scenario. Perhaps you can relate to this. Before a big meeting, I had a leader before every board meeting. A senior executive leader spent like days obsessing over the slides and the content and the talking points, and just being terrified of a tough question that might get asked when they're in the room. So this is over worry. Again, preparing is not a bad thing, but the over obsession can sometimes take a toll. And what that shows up is with this upper limit behavior that I'm describing is overcompensating to avoid a feeling of being like quote unquote found out as not smart enough. Another one we talked about was criticism. I mentioned like blame and criticism of others. How that can show up is micromanagement. Micromanagement is a form of like basically saying you're not good enough or you're not doing it the way that I would. So micromanaging despite having a strong team, okay? And we're not talking about stepping in when you need to, when it's appropriate. The scenario I want to give you is a VP that hired very talented people, trusted the people, but when things got to be too high of stakes, or so they felt, they could not let go of the details. And so this upper limit behavior that I'm describing was basically subconsciously keeping themselves in the weeds in all the day-to-day minutia in order to stay in control of that situation rather than truly leveling up and stepping in to a more strategic role. And it really like kept them small, kept them in this smaller behavior. And then by staying in the weeds, they missed some of the bigger picture elements and essentially self-perpetuated that thought. Okay, another way this shows up is deflecting. Deflecting is, or I guess an example of deflecting would be like downplaying your accomplishments. So, a real life scenario. So, a leader hits major milestones. They hit like record profits, a very successful transformation that occurred, and basically kind of downplayed it by saying, like, oh, it's nothing, or it wasn't just me, it's not that big of a deal, instead of like owning the success of what occurred. Again, example is upper limit behavior is essentially feeling so uncomfortable with all of that praise and that recognition. And so, in order to bring himself back down, is minimizing the wins to like right set things. The last example I'll give you is in this book, we talk about like working in the zone of genius versus the zone of excellence. So, meaning zone of genius is like what you were truly called to do, what you love to do, versus zone of excellence is what you're perhaps good, you may even great at, but you're avoiding stepping into that like next level work that you need to and you would love to do. So basically, the behavior is like saying yes to everything, overbooking, feeling busy. So, real life scenario. So, this is like when a CEO gave the example of like agreeing to like everything, every new idea, every new project, spreading themselves overly thin rather than focusing in on the zone of genius, not only of themselves, but their organization. Like, what is the place where the area where they can play that they are best at, that they love to do? So, upper limit behavior, what this looks like, this is like the example of being fearful of being too big for their britches, as I mentioned before. And it leads to avoiding like big and bold and focused moves. So, I want to give you these examples because these real life examples and scenarios, because it helps, of course, put it a little bit more into perspective. But I think that, and the point of this is in noticing and recognizing this and having a desire to change this. And part of that is just making more room in your awareness. And so, again, if you're feeling like, okay, maybe there is some space where I might be self-sabotaging in this way, it's being aware so that you can make more room for this level of success that you want to achieve and the level of abundance that is needed to step into and up to these levels. So let's talk about now executive presence meeting the upper limit and how these two kind of converge. So again, executive presence really is defined as really how are we showing up? How are we carrying ourselves? How are others experiencing your leadership as an executive? Okay. And what happens is, if we've been describing what they call in this book is the upper limit problem. What happens is this upper limit problem starts to erode on that executive presence. And again, how this occurs is some of the ways I've described before, but it's that overthinking, before meetings, before important meetings, it's showing up by like talking yourself out of going to the next level, maybe applying for that next level role, stepping into that next level of leadership, and like downplaying your success. It may show up like apologizing and being overly apologetic, maybe before sharing your big ideas or like taking up too much space, being apologetic for even being there, and being in that space. And so this is what happens. So executive presence, it requires confidence and it requires authenticity. And so when these upper limit like behaviors are showing up, both are impossible, like that confidence and that authenticity, both are impossible when you're constantly second guessing whether or not you belong. And so that's how this like kind of trifecta of executive presence, upper limit, and imposter syndrome like collide, right? Leveling up to that confidence and authority, authenticity level is absolutely impossible when these exist. So let's talk about like how does coaching help and what can we do to like work on some of this, right? What happens is number one, awareness is massive. And so coaching creates awareness. It just starts to crack open the darkness and into the light of it, like starts to shine a light on some of your upper limit triggers. And reading through this book, I realized like there are certain times where we start to cap ourselves. And by going through coaching activities and going through some of this awareness activities, it helps executives reframe some of their self-doubt into growth. And so what you can do is instead of asking, what if I fail? You can start asking, what if this is my next leap forward? Essentially, what if some of this was meant for me? What if some of these challenges that I'm facing, what if some of these obstacles I'm facing are exactly for me? And then allowing me to sharpen my skills to propel forward. So, coaching really can help you build confidence through the skill development, AKA the executive presence, and the mindset work, and AKA overcoming the imposter syndrome. And so I'll talk through this next, but we'll work through talking through what are some practical coaching tools. And some of these you can start like literally right away, right after this podcast. You can start naming your upper limit behaviors. You can start practicing presence in your executive presence while you're under some of the pressure that you experience within your day-to-day work. And you can use some of this thought work to start to rewire some of your success beliefs. All right, so let's talk about it. So, what do we do? So, step one is talking about the awareness piece. So, how do you spot this quote unquote upper limit? So, here's some questions to ask. So, when you're observing and walking through it, is maybe you think through where in your leadership are you holding back, maybe even playing small, even if others see you ready for more. Number two is if you experience success, do you find yourself waiting for the other shoe to drop? And then, if so, how does that show up in your own behavior? And then the third question is what compliments or recognition make you feel really uncomfortable to receive? And if you do, why? When you're thinking about executive presence and imposter syndrome, some questions to ask yourself are how often do you second guess yourself before you go into big meetings, presentations, or maybe big decisions that you have to make? And secondly, what stories do you tell yourself about not being quote unquote enough? And then who would you be without those stories? And then third, in what ways does self-doubt change how you are showing up in the room? And then we think about coaching yourself. Some things that you can ask to work through would be number one, if you're not worried about failing or being quote unquote too big, what bold moves would you make in your leadership today? The second question, what patterns keep showing up that might be your version of the upper limit problem? And so just scanning and observing, like maybe there's places in your life where you find yourself hitting this level of success, but then there's something that occurs that you start to feel and start to doubt yourself. And then you subconsciously are bringing yourself back down to what, not reality, but your more comfortable reality that you were living before. And then the last one in this series of questions is how would your executive presence change if you fully believed you belonged at the table? All right. So hopefully some of those prompts are helpful. I myself, I worked through this book and have a ton of like notes throughout it. And so again, highly recommend it as a good read, but I know sometimes some of you are super busy. And so I wanted to give you at least a little preview into it. But The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, great book. But I know sometimes you as executives, you don't have the time to absorb all of this. So that's what I do as your coach is that I read what is out there. I do a ton of research and listening to a lot of stuff and then try to digest it in a way that's helpful to you. So again, The Big Leap teaches you stop living in just your zone of excellence. This is places where you are good, maybe even great, but you're not totally lit up by this work. And then notice where you might not be stepping into your zone of genius. Your zone of genius is where you thrive. It's work that you love to do. It's where you should be. I actually worked through with a leader this week. We were talking about how much she had on her plate and how she was trying to avoid getting fired. And me, by the way, there was nowhere close that she was even coming close to getting fired. She had actually just received a promotion and a really significant raise. However, her boss had been let go. And so she was really kind of freaked out about it. So what she was doing is there were certain administrative tasks that because some other people had left within an organization she had taken on. And they started suggesting that like they could hire some people to let them go and things like that. But she's like, I'm afraid to let some of this administrative work go. And I'm working 12 hours a day every day because I'm afraid that they're going to let me go because I'm not doing it. I'm like, this actually makes no sense. So let's talk about what are the things or where you could spend your time. Again, talking about the zone of genius, where could your most valuable time be spent if you let some of this go? And then how do you build up and step into some of that work and make sure that there's significance and there is value being added? And actually, probably more value will be added if you step into the zone of genius if you let some of this other stuff go. But it absolutely, I saw exactly where this was playing out, where she was trying to stay relevant. But in actuality, it was self-sabotage and it was sabotaging where she actually could go. Not because of reality, because of the fear she had about what was about to happen. Okay. So again, what this could look like, again, for executives, what it means is, are you able to delegate what others can do versus holding on to it? Are you going to speak from a place of like vision and where you're headed in the future and not from fear? And are you leading in a way that is totally aligned with your strengths and your values rather than leading from a place of insecurity? Okay. So I want to recap again. Imposter syndrome, executive presence, comboed with this upper limit problem, they're like two sides of the same coin. And so I encourage you, your next level of leadership does not require more doing. It requires more being. And part of that is building more confidence, more executive presence, more courage to play big. And to do that, you gotta notice where you might be limiting yourself and holding back and playing small. And so, my call to action to you is to explore executive coaching and to break through your own upper limits. As always, I am so happy to help you with this. I am open right now for consults for fall. For some reason, I think executive presence is hitting a note with you. I have had so many consults from you from the podcast out there, those listeners talking about all of the things that are happening for you. What's awesome is I've heard of a lot of exciting movement. Some of you are getting new jobs, new roles, bigger roles, which is a great, exciting milestone in your career. But you are needing some support with this. And so if you find yourself wanting to explore and talk about what that could look like, do not hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me through so many different avenues, but the easiest is probably my website. Go to my website. It's aliciacowancoaching.com. It's ELISIAKEOWN coaching.com. You can message me and schedule a consult right there. I'd be happy to talk to you and hear all about what's going on for you. So until next time, I hope you're having a beautiful fall if it's when you're listening to this, and I will speak to you soon. Thanks, friends.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.